In the days that followed, my nights grew increasingly restless. The eerie message on the window pane seemed to echo in my mind, leaving me paralyzed with dread. I installed additional locks on my windows and doors, but the feeling of vulnerability persisted. Every creak of the house or gust of wind was amplified, fueling my growing paranoia. I became obsessed with tracking the figure's movements, constantly peering out the window to catch a glimpse of him. My once serene home office now felt like a cage, with the man's presence looming ever closer. The figure's visits became more frequent, and his shadow seemed to draw nearer to my window each night. I tried to rationalize the situation, attributing it to stress or exhaustion. Yet, every time I turned off the lights and tried to sleep, I would lie awake, heart racing, eyes glued to the window. The uncertainty of his intentions gnawed at me, and I found myself questioning every sound and shadow. It was as if the man from the window was silently orchestrating my descent into paranoia. One night, as the clock struck midnight, I noticed something different. The figure was no longer standing still. He appeared to be moving closer to the house. My breathing quickened, and I felt a cold sweat break out. Desperate for answers, I decided to take a photograph, hoping to capture any detail that might reveal the man's identity or intentions. As I snapped the picture, I felt a chill run down my spine. The figure's face, though still obscured, seemed to convey a sinister satisfaction. As I reviewed the photograph, I noticed something alarming, a reflection in the window behind the figure. It showed a blurry, shadowy shape that appeared to be someone, or something, lurking just out of sight. The sight sent a wave of nausea through me. It was clear that the man from the window was not alone. The sense of dread deepened, and I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The man from the window was just the beginning of a far more sinister presence. The chilling photograph left me with more questions than answers. Determined to uncover the truth, I began to investigate. My first step was to examine the neighborhood. I asked around, hoping someone might have seen something unusual, but the responses were uniformly dismissive or unhelpful. It seemed as though no one else had noticed the shadowy figure. Frustrated, I turned to local forums and social media groups, sharing the photograph and seeking any leads. To my surprise, a few people responded with similar stories of mysterious figures lurking around their homes. It seemed I wasn't alone in my experience. One user even mentioned a local urban legend about a figure that appeared to stalk people who were isolated or under significant stress. I delved deeper into these stories and found a pattern. The figure often appeared to those who were alone during late-night hours, and it was said to reflect the observer's own fears. It was unsettling to think that this figure might be feeding off my own paranoia. I decided to take precautions to protect myself and my home. I installed security cameras around my property and began keeping a detailed log of any unusual occurrences. As I reviewed the footage, a new layer of terror unfolded. The security cameras caught glimpses of the figure moving closer to my window, but there was something more disturbing. The footage showed fleeting, shadowy shapes that seemed to dance around the area, as if the figure was not alone, but accompanied by other unseen entities. I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, hoping to gain insight into the disturbing phenomena. They explained that such entities often manifest in places where people are most vulnerable, feeding off the fear they generate. The investigator's words only heightened my anxiety, but I had no choice but to face my fears head-on. My investigation revealed that the man from the window might be a manifestation of my own anxiety, or an actual entity tied to the urban legend. The lines between reality and paranoia blurred, leaving me in a constant state of fear. The search for answers only deepened the mystery, as I struggled to determine whether the man from the window was a tangible threat or a figment of my own troubled mind. As the investigation continued, the situation began to deteriorate. The man from the window was no longer just a figure of my imagination. He had become a persistent and terrifying reality. My anxiety escalated, and I started to notice disturbing changes in my environment. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and strange noises echoed through the house, even though everything was locked and secure. One night, as I reviewed the security camera footage, I noticed something chilling. The figure was now accompanied by dark, shifting shapes that seemed to crawl along the walls of my home. They moved in ways that defied natural explanation, creating a grotesque dance of shadows that twisted and turned in the flickering light. My heart raced as I realized these shapes were not simply figments of my imagination. They were actively interacting with the figure. The figure's appearances became more frequent and more menacing. He would stand outside the window, his face still obscured, but his posture seemed more aggressive. It was as if he was trying to force his way into my reality. I felt trapped in my own home, the walls closing in with each passing day. The once comfortable sanctuary of my office had become a place of constant dread. Desperate for a solution, I tried to reach out to the paranormal investigator again. They suggested performing a cleansing ritual to drive away negative energies. Although skeptical, I decided to give it a try. The ritual involved various symbols, incantations, and the burning of sage to purify the space. As I performed the ritual, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every step of the process accompanied by an eerie silence that seemed to grow thicker. After the ritual, there was a brief respite. The figure's visits diminished, and the strange occurrences seemed to fade. However, the relief was short-lived. The darkness that had taken hold of my home felt deeper and more pervasive. The figure's presence was now a constant shadow in my mind, a reminder that no matter how many rituals or security measures I took, the true darkness was within me. The man from the window had become a symbol of my fears, a reflection of the growing darkness that consumed my thoughts. Even as I fought to reclaim my sanity, I knew that the battle was far from over. The figure, whether a literal entity or a manifestation of my anxieties, had left an indelible mark on my life. The fear and paranoia that had gripped me over the months reached a breaking point. Despite my efforts to find solace, the man from the window continued to torment me. Each night, his silhouette loomed outside, and the unsettling shapes that accompanied him seemed to grow bolder. I felt cornered by my own mind and the inexplicable presence that haunted me. One evening, I resolved to confront my fears head-on. I devised a plan to face the figure directly, hoping to end the nightmare once and for all. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I approached the window, determined to capture any evidence and challenge the figure's presence. My hands trembled as I peered out into the darkness, the familiar shadow standing across the street. As I shone the flashlight on the figure, he remained motionless, his face still obscured by darkness. I took several photos, each flash revealing fleeting glimpses of his form. The more I stared, the more I felt as though the figure was not merely watching, but actively engaging with my fear. It was as if the more I tried to understand him, the more he seemed to feed off my terror. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the candlelight and plunging the room into darkness. The figure's shadow loomed larger, stretching across my window as if reaching out to me. I heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. It was a chilling, distorted voice that seemed to say, "You can't escape." In a moment of clarity amidst the terror, I realized that the figure was not just an external threat, but a manifestation of my own fears and insecurities. The darkness that had consumed my life was rooted in my own mind. The figure was a reflection of the anxieties I had allowed to take control. With this realization, I faced the window one last time, feeling an overwhelming mix of fear and resolve. As dawn approached, the figure began to recede, fading into the early light. The shadows that had haunted me seemed to dissipate with the arrival of the day. I knew that while the man from the window might not disappear entirely, confronting him had given me a chance to reclaim control over my own fears. The battle was far from over, but I had taken the first step toward overcoming the darkness that had plagued me.